5 years of loneliness, one final goodbye letter, and then a chance encounter that changed everything. This is Emma's story of rediscovering life when she thought all hope was lost. Hi everyone, welcome to Life Flow, where every story brings a new perspective. Let's get started. The morning light filtered softly through the curtains of Emma's small, quiet house. It had been 5 years since John, her husband of nearly 40 years, had passed away. Today marked that painful anniversary, and the weight of his absence felt heavier than ever. Emma, now 73, sat at the edge of her bed, staring blankly at the walls that had witnessed both the happiest and saddest moments of her life. Emma had no children. She and John had tried for years, but it was never meant to be. Now, with him gone, she was truly alone. In the past 5 years, her life had grown smaller, more isolated. She no longer spoke to neighbors, and the occasional trips to the grocery store or pharmacy were the only times she saw other people. But even then, there were no conversations. She moved through life like a ghost, unseen and unheard. Today, however, felt different. Today, the loneliness was suffocating. Emma had woken up with her heart heavy, her thoughts darker than usual. She had made a decision the night before. This would be the last day she would wake up to an empty bed, an empty house. She couldn't bear the silence anymore. Last night, she had written a letter, a goodbye to the world, and tucked it away in her drawer. But before taking that final step, she needed to leave the house one last time, to walk through the world one more time. She dressed slowly, pulling on the same sweater she had worn 100 times, her hands shaking with the weight of her decision. When she arrived at the local cafe, a place she and John used to visit together every weekend, she ordered her usual breakfast, tea and toast. As she sat down at a small table by the window, she felt her eyes welling up with tears. The cafe had barely changed, but her life had. The memories of her and John laughing, sharing quiet moments, flooded her mind, and she couldn't stop the tears that spilled over. Emma sat quietly, trying to compose herself, wiping her eyes with a trembling hand. She hadn't spoken to anyone in days, hadn't smiled in even longer. She felt invisible, like no one cared whether she existed or not. As she stared down at her cup of tea, a part of her wished someone would notice, that someone would care. Across the room, Sarah, a young mother of 2, was sipping her coffee. She had come to the cafe for a rare moment of peace before heading off to work. It was then that she noticed Emma, sitting alone by the window. There was something about the older woman, her hunched shoulders, the way her hands trembled as she wiped away tears, that tugged at Sarah's heart. Sarah couldn't ignore the sadness she saw in Emma's eyes, those eyes glistening with unshed tears. They reminded her of her own grandmother, who had passed away years earlier. Her grandmother had always been a source of wisdom and warmth in Sarah's life, and seeing Emma sitting there so alone brought back memories of her. Without thinking twice, Sarah got up from her seat and walked over to Emma's table. She approached gently, not wanting to startle her. "Excuse me," Sarah said softly, offering a warm smile. "Would you mind if I sat with you?" Emma looked up, startled by the intrusion. Her first instinct was to say no, to retreat further into her solitude. But something in Sarah's kind eyes and gentle demeanor made her pause. It had been so long since anyone had shown her kindness. I suppose that's all right," Emma said quietly, her voice shaky from disuse. Sarah sat down, placing her coffee on the table. "I couldn't help but notice. You seemed like you could use some company," she said, her tone full of compassion. Emma nodded, her throat too tight to speak. She wasn't used to anyone paying attention to her anymore. Sarah didn't push her to talk right away. Instead, she started a light conversation, talking about the weather, her morning, and how she had 2 young children who kept her on her toes. Gradually, as Sarah spoke, Emma began to relax. Her hands stopped trembling, and she found herself listening, drawn in by the younger woman's warmth and openness. After a few moments of silence, Sarah leaned in a little closer. "I know we've just met, but I can't help but feel like you're going through something. I lost my grandmother a few years ago, and, well, seeing you reminded me of her. She was such a strong woman, but even she had moments when she felt alone." Emma swallowed hard, her chest tightening as Sarah's words hit close to home. "It's been 5 years," Emma said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. 5 years since my husband died, and I haven't really spoken to anyone since. Sarah's eyes softened even more, her heart aching for the woman sitting across from her. I'm so sorry, she said. That must be incredibly hard. But you don't have to be alone. I know we just met, but I'd love for you to join me this weekend. I'm taking my kids to the park, and I think they'd love to meet you. Emma blinked, surprised by the offer. It had been years since anyone had invited her anywhere, let alone to spend time with a family. The thought of being around children, of being included in something so simple and joyful, stirred something inside her. I don't know, Emma said, her voice wavering. I haven't been out like that in a long time. That's okay, Sarah reassured her. There's no pressure. But you deserve to be around people who care. My kids would love you, I'm sure of it. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Emma felt a flicker of hope. She looked at Sarah, tears once again brimming in her eyes. But this time, they were tears of gratitude. I need to tell you something, Emma said, her voice trembling. I came here today because I didn't think I could go on. I wrote a letter last night, saying goodbye. But you've given me a reason to stay. You've given me a lesson in life. And I'm so thankful. Sarah felt her own eyes misting over as she reached across the table, taking Emma's hand in hers. You're not alone, Emma. And I'm so glad you're still here. Let's take things one day at a time, okay? We'll start with a park this weekend. The weekend arrived more quickly than Emma had anticipated. Despite the flicker of hope she had felt in the cafe with Sarah, she was nervous. It had been so long since she had been around people, real, warm, caring people, that she wasn't sure she would know how to act. What if Sarah's children didn't like her? What if she felt out of place? But as she sat on the edge of her bed that Saturday morning, Emma thought about the letter she had written earlier in the week. The letter that she had meant to be her final goodbye to the world. She had been ready to leave it all behind. And yet, here she was, preparing to spend the day with a family who had extended a hand of friendship to her. She opened her closet and took out one of her nicer blouses, one she hadn't worn in years. She brushed her silver hair and looked at herself in the mirror. The woman staring back at her was still marked by years of grief and loneliness, but there was something new in her eyes, a spark of life that hadn't been there in so long. When she arrived at the park, Sarah was already there with her 2 children, Lily, who was 5, and Ethan, who was 8. They were running around on the playground, laughing and shouting, their joy infectious. As Emma approached, Sarah waved her over with a big smile. There she is. Emma, I'm so glad you came, Sarah said, greeting her warmly. Lily and Ethan ran over, curiosity shining in their eyes. Sarah knelt down to their level and introduced them. This is Emma. She's a very special friend of mine. Lily, with her blonde curls bouncing, smiled shyly at Emma. Hi, Emma, she said, her voice sweet and soft. Ethan, more bold, grinned and asked, Do you like ice cream? We're going to get ice cream later. Emma couldn't help but smile. She felt her nervousness melting away in the presence of these innocent, happy children. I love ice cream, she said, her voice lighter than it had been in years. The afternoon passed in a blur of laughter and play. Emma found herself sitting on a bench with Sarah, watching the children chase each other around the park. She couldn't remember the last time she had felt so at peace, so included. It was as if the dark cloud that had been hanging over her for so long was finally beginning to lift. As the sun began to set and the children grew tired, Sarah turned to Emma with a smile. I told you they'd love you. They've been asking about you all week. Emma's heart swelled with warmth. I haven't felt this happy in a long time, she admitted. I was so sure that my life was over, that there was nothing left for me. But you showed me that there's still kindness in the world, that I can still be a part of something. Sarah reached out and gently squeezed Emma's hand. I'm so glad you're here, Emma. You've already brought so much light into our lives, and I can see that there's so much more ahead for you. The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of new beginnings for Emma. Sarah continued to invite her out, sometimes for tea, sometimes for walks in the park, and often for family dinners. Sarah's children quickly grew attached to Emma, and soon, they began calling her Grandma Emma. The first time Lily said it, Emma had to excuse herself to wipe away the tears that filled her eyes. She had never had children of her own, but now, In a way she had never expected, she was part of a family again. As time went on, Emma's circle of friends began to grow. Sarah introduced her to her friends and family, and Emma found herself surrounded by people who cared about her. She had gone from a life of isolation and despair to one filled with laughter, conversation, and love. At first, Emma felt a little out of place at Sarah's social gatherings, unsure of how she fit in with the younger crowd. But slowly, she found her voice again. The more she spoke with Sarah's friends, the more they appreciated her wisdom and warmth. They began to seek her out for advice, to listen to her stories, and to value her presence. Emma realized that even though she had lived a long life, she still had much to offer. One evening, after another family dinner, Emma sat with Sarah on the porch, watching the sun set. The children were inside, playing quietly after a long day. Emma felt an overwhelming sense of peace. "I can't thank you enough for what you've done for me," Emma said softly. "If it hadn't been for you, I don't know where I'd be right now." Sarah shook her head. "You don't have to thank me, Emma. I just saw someone who needed a friend. And now, I can't imagine my life without you in it." Emma smiled, her heart full. "I wrote that letter, the one I told you about, the day we met. It was my goodbye letter. I was ready to give up that day. But you saved me, Sarah. You gave me a reason to stay." Sarah's eyes glistened with tears as she reached out and took Emma's hand. "You saved yourself, Emma. You were brave enough to let someone in. And now, look at how many people love you." Emma nodded, her throat tight with emotion. She had thought her life was over, that she had nothing left to give. But in the months since she had met Sarah, her world had opened up in ways she never could have imagined. She had found friendship, love, and a new family. And most of all, she had found hope. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Emma looked out at the world before her. She had been given a second chance, and she wasn't going to waste it. There was still so much life left to live, and she was ready for every moment of it. Emma continued to flourish in her newfound friendships. The bond between her and Sarah grew deeper, and Sarah's children adored her as their Grandma Emma. She began to organize small gatherings for seniors in her community, encouraging others who had felt the same isolation she once did to reconnect and find hope again. Her life, once marked by loneliness and despair, was now filled with the joys of connection, friendship, and family. And every morning, as she looked out at the rising sun, Emma was reminded that it was never too late for a new beginning. If Emma's story touched you as much as it touched me, don't forget to like the video and hit that subscribe button. Join me for more inspiring stories that remind us all that it's never too late to find hope and connection. Let's keep sharing these moments together.